So we're going to talk about strength-based parenting. There's really three main themes to this talk: how to focus on how to cultivate strengths and how to cultivate a grit and growth mindset. Taking those two perspectives in consideration as a parent is going to help us stay focused through the chaos of managing children. I'm not going to make it any more complicated than that. The third part is overcoming disabilities, which I find extremely, extremely important to talk about. It could be its own topic, but I'm putting it into this one. Parenting the Rebel is its own topic. I'm asking Judy Johnson, one of our parent coaches, to jump into that topic. She I think she's saying yes. It's all about when I do that. But Parenting the Rebel, which so many of our kids have the rebel personality, and it is one of the most complex personalities to parent. So, boy, that's going to be, I think you guys are going to pack the seats for that one. I'm also a parent, 2 kids. I have an 8th grader, 2nd grader, survived the pandemic kind of stuff. I'm learning, like you all are, on how to really cultivate my child's strengths, interests, and make the most of, their life, and try to, if anything else, get out of their way and not cause too much damage. But I think I'm right with you in this journey. So from a company standpoint, just some people don't know what we do. Some of you do, but as an organization, we really offer a lot of supports and services to parents and kids and adults. We have a really powerful team of coaches. So if there's any questions, you can please let me know. But like I said, I had a lot of faces on the screen that I don't know, and I thought it would be helpful for you to at least know who I am and who we are. Okay, so there are other ways of getting information from us that not just these presentations, but go on to, you can click on this link and you can use your phone. If you don't know how to do this, you put your camera over that grid in the bottom there, and it will show a website, and you just click on it. I'm going to do that throughout the presentation so you can follow along and get information as I go along. I'm not going to be sharing out video links. It takes too much time, but these images are awesome in getting and just being able to grab content quickly. This presentation is also available too. I think I shared that with you. It's right here. Right here. Oh, sorry. I don't have it here. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't put it in here. That's my fault. But anyways, this is where you can kind of get information as I go along instead of trying to find the link. Okay. Okay. Do you have your notebook with you? If you took part in my last workshop on the importance of looking at intention and attention and focus, one of the things that I asked for is this is an engaging process. This is a dialogue, but it's also a chance for you to think and for you to be deliberate as a parent. I would like you to be able to grab your notebook and think with me on what this means to you as a parent. The questions I ask are deliberate. I want you thinking about what you are doing that is cultivating or nurturing or alienating or criticizing. It doesn't really matter what. It's just, this is a chance for you to reflect and make decisions on what you might want to do differently to match and mirror the child that you're thinking about, right? So what do you spend your time focusing on as a parent? It's so important as parents, even as adults, we get what we focus on. Doesn't matter what it is, right? But we got to be careful what we focus on, because we're going to continue to attract it, especially if we don't want that as an outcome. So if I spend most of my time thinking about the negative thing, fear, criticism, the arguing, the nagging, it's really important that I sit down and reflect on what that means. What am I nagging about? What am I fighting about? And how do I start changing that language, changing my energy, changing my thought process and behavior to start to shift from that reactive parenting style to a proactive, strength-based parenting style? Okay, this is really step one, is I have to start to become aware of my own tendencies and what role I play. It's really empowering to do that, a little scary too, but it's empowering to look at ourselves critically like that and then say, based on what I'm doing in my own self-discovery, my own process, how do I start to shift my own parenting approach, right? And let's think of this. If you are taking notes in this, and if you are active in this process, then great. Here's the first question. What is your top parenting goal? We talked about this in my last training, but hopefully you took some of that information away and did some work over the last month. Maybe you've come back to this meeting with greater clarity, greater focus, greater intention into the parent you're trying to be, right? Is your goal similar to this? It's kind of a cool one. It's kind of a very, very general one, right? It's one we can kind of think about and reflect on and actually and see for any child that we care about, right? Is this something like this? To parent my child to be the best version of themselves, to live a life of purpose and meaning. Yeah, that sounds pretty ideal. So how do we do that? And how do we do that from a strength-based perspective? So what about your son? Who in the room has a mat in their mind, right? But when you think about this in relation to your own child, what does this relate to that? How does my vision for my child relate to them? And I have to consider that maybe it means I start to think about my own vision for them. What does it look like if I start thinking about their future without fear, without doubt, without criticism, and with absolute utmost hope and faith that they will get there? Truth is, they will. Whatever the challenges that you ponder, whatever the reason for you joining this call, our children, think about this, it's better to feel that they will get there. And our job is to help them find the way. Of course, you should be calling your mother every day. So I'm going to introduce you to someone really special to me, but not nearly as special as to one of the parents in our audience. Mindy has joined me, and I met Brian when he was in college, and had a pleasure, and he and I have been in touch ever since. But Brian was kind of a really good example of a type of child that had some real passions, interests that were getting suffocated by the overwhelming expectations maybe around who they thought they should be, and maybe their past identity in conflict with their future desires and goals. And getting really torn in between those two worlds was getting overwhelming. And so give you a little snippet of who Brian is today, and then I'm going to ask Mindy a couple questions. So Brian is a singer-songwriter, graduated from college. He did, Mindy. And he decided to continue his pursuit of music and his passion for singing. And in some ways, the rest is history. The valley, at the bottom, my heart longs to be. Now, when Brian entered college, he was really a stud pitcher. That's one thing I remember about him. He's super social. He was charismatic. He had a lot of friends. But there was one thing about his identity that was conflicting this other part of him, and that was his athletic potential. And he was really at a real polarizing issue around what do I do with that. And it took some soul searching with him and some deep conversation with his mom as well to start to figure out really how to cultivate the innate potential and the voice inside that was calling him in a certain direction, but it was a scary direction. But Mindy, are you here with us right now?
I am.
Mindy, I get goosebumps just listening to him, and I know you do too. But I can't get enough of his music. He's so talented, and I know how. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but do you mind if I ask you a couple questions, just a quick share out to the audience?
Of course.
Cool. I really appreciate that. So one thing that's really important in this presentation as an outcome is really recognizing our fears as parents. Because our fears can really drive our behaviors and the tension that we create with our children. What is can you just share out maybe just kind of maybe one or two kind of fears that you had to navigate in your support of Brian?
Yeah, so he was in high school before we knew there was an executive function issue, because he had basically, he was a really easygoing kid. He got along with everybody. He was bright, and he just sort of faked it till he made it in middle school, and got by without doing much work. And then all of a sudden in high school, he started having issues with completing tasks in terms of projects, and not finishing readings. And so, and we're two pediatricians, and with a very successful older child, academically successful older child. And so our fear was that he wasn't going to thrive academically, and that he was not going to get himself into a great college, and then he was not going to have, his dreams of what he was going to be when he kind of grew up would be limited by this. So we were rescuing him. We were basically rescuing him at every step of the way, which was a really wrong move on our part, because then we weren't able to rescue him anymore when he got to college, because we weren't there, and he completely fell on his face. And David is really humble, but what I will tell you is he really rescued not only Brian, but he rescued our entire family. I called him on Christmas or the day before Christmas, maybe, and he spent an hour on the phone with me. I cold called him, and he was really single-handedly responsible for opening our eyes and making us really understand how to support Brian, and help him with his passions and strengths. And when I told Brian about this, and he said it's really interesting that it's strength based, why not passion based?
Great question. I can't wait to get to that answer. Great question. Hey, so Mindy, I think that it's interesting because someone like Brian could probably, it's easy for him to navigate that phrase passion. I think for a lot of us, the energy, the emotion with passion is pretty strong. And some of us don't really have that type of connection with something called passion. So for many of our kids, it's not that easy. It's not that simple to look at it from a passion perspective. For Brian, different story, right? Can you share out what advice you'd have if you were to kind of think of three maybe items of advice, maybe for the younger parents out here that have kids that aren't quite there yet?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. We all have this dream when we create a life. We all have sort of an expectation and a dream about what that child is going to be like. We daydream about it, when they grow up, and when they meet their significant other, and we're gonna mourn some of those dreams along the way, because they're what they want and who they are. It doesn't necessarily follow your dream for them, so on so many levels, right? So I think it's okay to have dreams. They're normal, right? We're all, that's a normal human response, but try to be open to hearing and listening to your child, and not talking at them, but talking with them, and trying to not be judgmental, trying to be open, go to them with open conversations, not oh well, when you go to college, go to them, well, what do you think you'll do after high school? Have a more broad sense of what life can be.
Yeah. And thank you, Mindy, for your for your wisdom. I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020. And I think to be able to move forward as parents with younger kids with some feedback and some guidance, I feel is gives us hope. And for some of us, right, but it's not easy, right? The fears can take over no matter what.
Oh, and I didn't do a very good job of it initially. I mean, we both did a terrible job of it initially, but after he graduated college and he told us he was going to be a singer-songwriter, and this is what he wanted to do. We're like, that is fabulous. And almost every single one of my friends said, "How are you supporting this? Are you kidding me? How are you supporting your child becoming a singer-songwriter?" And I said, "Oh my God, it's easy. Like, this is what he wants to do. And all I want for my child is that they have a successful life in whatever they want that, however they define that." And that, I think, was critical for, I think you have to work on yourself first to sort of get over yourself, and then be able to support your child. So if it means that you need to go to therapy and you need to address your own issues, I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Mindy, for that. Okay, so based on kind of where do we go from there, it's really going to be a question of how do I do that as a parent. So that was really thank you, Mindy, for this transition and for really giving us a soundbite from your life, and thank you for letting me showcase Brian. I'm glad he knows that I was literally putting him out there. But so what does it mean to start helping our children, starting to cultivate these strengths, these interests, these innate abilities? I did stay away from that word passion. I think for some of us, that's too big of an emotion. I think we're pretty fortunate people if there is a passion that drives us with an intense emotion. For the rest of us, it's maybe a quieter journey around things I like, things I don't like, things I'm interested in, things I'm not interested in, how that pushes me away. But for us as parents, it really has a lot to do with what fears we want to really keep in check, and how do we really shape those, take those moments and really start to kind of change our own parenting approach to acknowledge those fears and move through them deliberately with our children. And how do we cultivate and nurture our children in a different way? But why the term interest? Why does that matter? Well, when you look at kind of the research and you look at the trajectory around success and enjoyment and fulfillment in life and meaning and purpose, it has a lot to do with the interests that we move towards. What do we find enjoyable? What are we good at? Right? It may start with what I don't like, but eventually starts to move in what can I tolerate? But that's kind of like the low-hanging interest. But also, what I really enjoy doing, and how that starts to shape my future. Right. And personally, I did an internship a senior year in high school, and it was at a special needs school down the street from here. It's in Hanover, Massachusetts. And it was working with really complex children with special needs, like really complex. It was a private school for them. And high school, senior year. And that was the moment. Like, it just, to me, that brought together a lot of my interests and strengths into one clear picture. And I think I was pretty fortunate to have that opportunity. But for the rest of us, for many of our kids, we want that as well for them, right? To have that aha moment. Until then, how do we cultivate those conative strengths, those innate interests, those curiosities? And it sometimes starts with helping our children understand their personality and celebrating the strengths of their personality. And I'm not talking school. I really don't even want to consider school. School, for so many of our kids, is the exact opposite. It is the chronic reminder of what they suck at, right? Absolutely. So for them, for so many, the hope is that they find their interests in other areas, and we have to cultivate that. And so That means looking at maybe the hard skills. Maybe they're great writers, creative writers. So how does that blossom into something meaningful? They love to read. How does that blossom? Softer skills that are so much more important to long-term success in life. The emotional intelligence, right? Communication, listening skills. The classic example of the ADHD kid that's an exceptional outside salesman, but could never function behind a desk, right? So finding their tribe is my phrase for that. It's like, where is their tribe? Where are they connecting with their people, right? So I have a great example of one of my kiddos. Let's see. Well, first of all, I'll share Chris. Chris is one of my a client I worked with years ago, and I'll tell you, fifth grader, extremely intelligent, didn't really need the fifth grade from an academic standpoint. He needed that for more of the social emotional stuff, but he really struggled and he got his butt kicked most days by the challenges just making it through. But he had this overwhelming passion for animals. And so we started to cultivate this passion by getting him access to the 4-H club. And that started to lead into volunteering at vet clinics. By end of middle school, he had participated in the birthing of many different types of animals, hands-on, full immersion type experiences. I mean, this kid was a vet. This little man was a vet in the making. It was just a journey of cultivating. Did he still have his challenges? Absolutely. But he ended up going to agricultural high school and thrived. He found his tribe. He found his interests, connected with his interests. And that's really the biggest piece is we can handle the suffering of life if we have a balance, right? We can handle the struggles if we have the moments where we're not struggling and we're connecting with our love, our joy, and our passions, our interests, right? But we need that harmony. We need that yin and yang. If we're too stuck on one side, it makes life overwhelming. Right. So those kids that are socially awkward, but they find their tribe in a social skills group. It's that kiddo that got his butt kicked in every group sport through elementary and middle school. And everyone was like, he started to identify as just not an athlete. All of a sudden he gets onto the cross country team and he's leading the cross country team in races. Right. It doesn't necessarily matter, but as we listen and really listen to our children and let them trying to find their way, and as we step aside and cultivate those curiosities and guide them to make certain decisions, we end up finding that they start to move in a path that's more affirming to who they really are. Now, this is a cool way. Another perspective is to really think of the things that we kind of maybe annoy us about our children because they're just not really our tendencies, right? Think of the stubbornness. Now, stubbornness, maybe it's a stubbornness or an impulsivity or intrusive. There's certain negative characteristics that we may put on our children. But the truth is those types of personalities over time, maybe hyper focus or being fixated on certain things, can be cultivated into strengths as we think about how those types of traits can manifest out in the real world. And so we as a parents, you write them down. What are the personality traits that kind of rub you the wrong way? Maybe it's because you're just not like that. But the truth is that's not necessarily the best way to perceive that trait. What does it look like as a positive? And start to cultivate that with your children, especially now. I'll get more into this with ADHD in the slides, but what are the superpowers? What does it mean to have these disabilities, and how do I continue to cultivate through those disabilities the ability that's hidden in between? So let's challenge your perspective for a minute. What are kind of three passions or interests that you know your child possesses and you haven't really given it the attention that you probably should? And what are three weaknesses, or I should say perceived personality deficits that really should be seen as strengths? And how do you shape that? Right? And what opportunities are you not, that you know are in front of you and your child, that you know you could start cultivating tomorrow? What are those opportunities? And how do I start planning proactively as a parent to nurture them? So I'm going to teach you a few different ways of how to start to get how to help your child and yourself to develop an awareness and understanding of the strengths and weaknesses. Okay. The different types of assessments and profiles and questionnaires that you can use. I'm not going to give you an overwhelming number. I'm just going to talk to you about some of the best ones that might fit different parents with children at different developmental ages. Okay. Again, these presentations have been pretty universal in terms of age. So I try to give helpful information that relates to different age groups. So this is a great book. It's a great resource. It's Gretchen Rubin put together this personality profile kind of category, and there it really looks at personalities in 4 different categories. And the one that can become the most problematic is the rebel personality. And so the reason to give this is to really build awareness around not just your tendencies, as an adult, but how you can start creating a dialogue with your child and help them feel more empowered. So if they have a rebel personality, how do I embrace that as a personality and work with it as opposed to against it? Same as a parent, right? How do I parent that rebel personality? How do I parent the obliger? How do I parent the questioner? How do I parent the upholder? And if you're married, that's also really cool, right? How do I co-parent if I'm a questioner and my wife is an upholder, right? How do we negotiate that? So this is a really cool questionnaire, and doesn't take long to do, and you can sit down and have fun with this with your kids. And I would say, do it to yourself first. And if you are married, have your spouse do it as well, and see where you fit. And then you can do this thinking of your child as well and see where they fit, and then give it to them and see if you're correct. And again, have some fun building awareness around my personality, looking at strengths and tendencies, right? And then if your child is older, I'm going to say high school and above, this is an excellent process of helping your child start to connect with their interests as it relates to taking that leap into a career. And that also includes training in terms of college or college readiness or career readiness type training, whether that's college or otherwise, doesn't matter. But these are just really helpful resources. My next move is they're all heavily government funded resources, and there's just a massive amount of free content on there. So just imagine what you can do with your child to build and cultivate this curiosity, and how that aligns with what I might like to do. I always say to clients I do this with, even students, I said, sometimes the most helpful process, the outcome of this process, is to rule out the 80% of things I'm not interested in doing. And then as a result of that ruling out, I have 20% left to ponder and think about. Cool. And in that 20%, I can make at least 2 or 3 different decisions about what I might think is worth looking into. Right? Great conversation is, what do I think about college? I'm a big fan of putting our children in the driver's seat and letting them determine their path. It builds this sense of agency, this sense of autonomy, this sense of accountability, that I get to choose the path of my life related to who I'm trying to be, who I want to be, my strengths, interests, passions, desires. Doesn't really matter. But you can go through this process of exploring interests and strengths as it relates to college readiness. I had a student once that not on this survey, but we did a college readiness survey, and he did extremely well on all areas of college readiness. There was one area he didn't. And that area that he was really low in was motivation. I mean, he was like 10th percentile. His motivation for college was super low, but everything else was high. And he went to college, and it was a real struggle because the motivation challenge continued. So these types of surveys can just lead to really meaningful dialogue, which, if you're not careful, can lead to fear. But if you keep yourself out of that type of state, it can lead to really meaningful dialogue. And in that dialogue, I can start to help cultivate these interests, these strengths. ADHD can be a real pain in the ass for a lot of people, and they can get really down on themselves for having a medical condition that they have that is never going to go away, right? So one thing that can be extremely validating as soon as you know that there's an ADHD diagnosis in your child, cultivating deliberately and intentionally what are the superpowers, the things you can love about that condition, and how to nurture it, right? And what this means in terms of taking a strength-based relationship, because life's going to continue to exacerbate the symptoms and remind our kiddos over and over again that they can't focus and they can't pay attention and they can't remember things and they can't, whatever the can'ts are, add things to it, right? So we have to really step back and say, how do I help see through that disability and help to cultivate and promote and inspire my child through that strength-based lens. This is a fun process as well, is to really connect with our kids. Hey, it doesn't matter if you have dyslexia, it just matters what you do with that, right? And how I start to work through those disabilities to become something, right? And not letting the disability become my identity, right? But to see the ability that is within me and how to capitalize on that as a life goal, right? So does anybody here, I don't know if people know who Nick is, but he's if you think your life is when you're
hard
growing
up in life, it actually sort of matters to people how you look.
Then you should all meet Nick. He was born with no arms and no legs, and he is one of the most impressive men on the planet, and goes around speaking to schools and companies. He's married. He has children. He's fully employed. I mean, he tried to kill himself when he was 12 years old, or between 10 and 12. Tried to commit suicide. He just didn't think his life was worth living.
And so, because I know that I was on the brink of giving up, and I actually attempted suicide at age 10. Now, bro, I had a loving home. This country doesn't have one. There are 300,000 foster kids looking for a home.
What does that mean? I think this point of this slide is, while we're helping our children to nurture and cultivate their innate self, obviously it's not going to be easy. And they're going to have to figure out many of that journey on their own, right? Because even Nick, who came from a loving home, obviously with extreme limitations, found his way through it. And I think this is another kind of the side of this is we have to believe, and we have to have faith, and we have to stay focused on what we envision for our children. There's a tremendous amount of power behind that. And then continuing to support our children as they move through the challenges of life. I'm not saying, so I would say, I'm going to get to those slides, but we want to, as we start to help our kids start to focus, find their focus point, right? And we talk incessantly about what we see as the potential in them. We then start to help speak a different language in terms of, once we start to see them moving towards who they want to be, because we're always talking about that future self, then it's about really starting to learn the muscle, the language, and the behaviors of grit and growth, and how to foster that. It's not really necessary. It's harder to foster grit and growth mindset when you're trying to push your child to be something that you want them to be, and yet they're not emotionally or intellectually or cognitively aligned with. But it's far more meaningful when they start to move deliberately towards an identity. And then we start showing them how important, demonstrating through our own modeling, but also the language in parenting, the growth language in parenting around overcoming fears, moving through learning zones, growth zones, and how we expand towards who we're trying to be. And that we don't get there when we stay in our comfort zone. Right? So you see this potentiality in how we can harness and help our children see those strengths. And then once they're able to move towards things they really want to try to do, now I can start teaching what it means to deliberately grow and stretch through those limitations, those weaknesses that might be in the way, right? The weaknesses of a fixed mindset, the weaknesses of excuses, the weaknesses of lack of confidence, for example, right? And how do I move through those consciously, and how do I promote that as a parent, right? So I think giving our children, I think Mindy may have said this, but she said this earlier, she didn't say it in our talk, but she made a reference to letting our children learn through failure. And that can be extremely critical in building that sense of agency, that sense of self-efficacy when they are moving towards goals that are meaningful in their life, and how they learn through failure, right? And how we as a parent can celebrate the failure as an opportunity for growth, right? And so many of our children can be kind of crippled with anxiety because to them, failure is a breakdown of their identity. Because maybe they identify with perfection. Maybe they identify as being smart. And smart doesn't equate to failure. Smart means straight A's. So anything less than a straight A is failure. So this notion around failure is this notion around seeing failure as not necessarily my identity, but it's a moment in time for me to learn and grow, right? And experience that stretching of my comfort zone, right? So what does this mean? What can we do with our kids today? Well, you can try this survey, give it a try, talk to your children, you can do it yourself. You can talk about your past self when you do this survey with your child, and how you used to be one way, and how you developed this kind of grittiness when you started to realize what you wanted to do in your life, and how that grittiness led to these outcomes that your children experience today. But I really believe that so many of the success stories that we see with people with disabilities has a tremendous amount to do with following their interests or passions and developing the grittiness to persevere. And that's so important with the young adults that we love today that have ADHD, and how important it is, how grittiness is really a cornerstone of that growth, right? As parents, there's a language we can cultivate, a growth mindset, a grit mindset language we can cultivate. And I'm just giving a couple examples, but this is really supposed to springboard so that you can be thinking with your spouse, what is our language? What does it sound like as we as parents celebrating failure? What does it sound like if we are nurturing the, if my son comes home today, and my daughter reflects on this, which I never thought she would, but she goes, my dad used to always tell me, what did you fail at today? I never wanted to hear from my children, what went well, as much as I wanted to hear, what did you fail at, right? And what mistakes did you make is another example that I'll say, what mistakes did you make today? And really forcing them to think about those moments in the day where they tripped and fell. And what I'm trying to do in that is celebrate that our journey as a student has everything to do with learning and learning. And if we're not making mistakes, we're not learning, right? If we're not failing, then we're not really growing. And how the essence of life is built on failure. For many successful people, the success story of life is built on failure. I mean, raise your hand if you're a parent and you haven't failed, right? Doesn't happen. We don't choose to be parents because it's a fail safe zone. So embracing struggle and developing a language of never giving up, right? So, and really, when you think about stress, you think about anxiety, it's how do we start to nurture and embrace those feelings and feel them and move deliberately through them with intentionality, meaning I know where I'm going and these feelings are getting in the way, right? And letting our children fall and learn and helping them to get, not picking them up, but being there to help them get up, helping them see the problems and work out the solutions. Here's something fun to try. This is a kind of a good homework assignment. You can give this a try with your kids. And you have to lead by example, but here's how it goes. Think of this mission being the hard thing rule, and teaching working this as a family around life is about doing things that are hard, right? When I have a goal, goals don't really come easily. They require deliberate practice and attention and discipline and focus, right? To achieve that, whatever the goal is. Try this with your children, do it yourself. Like, say, for example, you want to start New Year's resolution of going to the gym, or you want to do a 30-day yoga or a 60-day or 90-day yoga practice. Whatever the goal is, have your children come up with a decision of what it is. And it has to be their own. That's the third rule there. The hard thing must be a personal choice, but something long-term. Maybe it's joining a sports team. Maybe it's practicing the violin. Maybe it's, getting on a roll, which some kids, they really want to be the best student possible. So I always say most students can achieve honor roll with deliberate practice. Right. So that might be a scenario too, but you can sit down and come up with goals that are meaningful. And then the second rule is you can't quit in the middle. Follow through. And try this with your family and see what you all learn through this experience and how you grow in this relationship around picking something of desire, of interests, and framing out this type of grit language around achieving it. What do we have for questions? I think we're doing okay. I'm ending just on time. So can I ask what questions people might have? I changed screens here because I have my other screen, which actually has the questions over here. So I can do both. Read questions and see the audience. What comes to mind? What examples? Maybe you have your own story that is a positive one. I'd love to hear some success stories or even a lesson learned. I tried this, David, and I fell on my face as a parent. Sometimes hearing those types of examples. But if there's any questions that you have for me, if I'm able to add something else to this presentation, I'd be happy to.